Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. President Joe Biden addresses the American public on his first 100 days in office. He laid out his vision for his administration that includes increasing taxes on the rich, urging Congress to take action on gun violence and police reform, and also fighting cancer.
I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power.
Cancer is the leading cause of death in Indian country. Melissa Buffalo heads the American Indian Cancer Foundation. She welcomed Biden's pledge to end cancer.
And so one, it's always been important to address these cancer burdens, but now with the COVID pandemic, it's even more important to really re-engage our relatives on the importance of those preventative screenings.
History was also noted at last night's speech by Kansas Representative Sharice Davids. She tweeted about Vice President Kamala Harris and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. As I watch President Biden's first address to Congress, I'm struck by the historic image of 2 women at the dais. Their leadership is vital as we take on the important work of building back better. The speech addressed more than 200 lawmakers who were seated apart from each other in the chamber. Today is the 76th anniversary of the liberation of Dachau. Dachau was the first concentration camp built by Adolf Hitler in 1935. When the American Allies liberated Dachau, there were 2 native brothers who helped. Bennett Freeney and his twin brother, Benjamin, were Chickasaw and Choctaw. And according to the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles, the brothers served in the U.S. Army as combat medics. Bennett was one of the first units to enter Dachau, and he helped free tens of thousands of prisoners. Bennett and his fellow soldiers were angry after finding prisoners suffering from typhoid and hunger. Rabbi Abraham Cooper is with Global Social Action. He explains the moment when the brothers saw the devastation.
When he saw the SS officer prancing around with his high boots and his, amazing power uniform and the Nazi death head on his cap, and he sees all these medals, he understood one thing. He wasn't standing before a soldier. He was standing before a criminal.
At the time, Bennett and his brother, Benjamin, were 23 years old. The Seminole Tribe of Florida is getting into the Texas real estate market. In September, the Seminoles purchased an upscale apartment complex with 145 units in Dallas, Texas. And this month, they added another complex with 124 luxury units. The rental properties have a fitness center, swimming pool, and sun deck. The properties are part of the tribe's investment portfolio and are purchased through the real estate fund. The Seminole Tribune reports the tribal investors are buying properties to enhance the intergenerational wealth. The tribe is now looking at additional luxury apartments in markets including Austin, Phoenix, and Denver. The St. Regis Mohawk tribe in New York is issuing a cease and desist order on marijuana dispensaries. Tribal lands are near the St. Lawrence River in upstate New York. The tribe says it's been made aware of marijuana dispensaries operating on its lands, which is against tribal law. WWNY reports the tribe does not want pot shops to operate until the tribe can create an adult-use marijuana ordinance and issue licenses. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed adult-use cannabis legislation into law last month. The Mohawk are currently working on an ordinance to regulate the cultivation, processing, and sale of marijuana in its tribal territory. From coast to coast, it's one of the latest trends sweeping the nation. And no, it's not a TikTok dance or another social media challenge. It's sports betting. While many states only allow in-person betting, more than 24 states, plus Washington, D.C., have made sports betting legal, according to Action Network, which tracks this information. Earlier this month, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey signed a bill legalizing sports betting in that state, and last Friday, Florida announced an agreement was reached between the Seminole Tribe and Governor Ron DeSantis to bring the action there. You can read this story on our website, IndianCountryToday.com, and search for the headline, Sports Betting, the New Shiny Toy. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When Peggy Flanagan won her election to become the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, little did she know the world was about to change.
We'll hear from her today about what it's like to govern during a pandemic and in the city at the heart of civil issues. We'll be back. Peggy Flanagan is Minnesota's 50th Lieutenant Governor. A member of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, she's making progress for children, working families, communities of color, and Indigenous communities, all central to her. And all Minnesotans who have historically been underserved and underrepresented. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's start by talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. And Minnesota has made some progress and a long way to go. Let's talk about the big picture.
Sure. So we were able to pass with bipartisan support for our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. And I think that was a long time coming. And I think, what really made the difference there was that we had Native women serving in the House at the time. I was in the Lieutenant Governor's office. And since that time, we've elected a Native woman to serve in the state Senate. And so I think it matters that we're at the table when these decisions are being made. That task force bill passed. The task force has done an incredible amount of work with elected officials and advocates, folks from law enforcement all across the state who came together with a report with some pretty solid recommendations. And this legislative session, we are asking the legislature to invest about $500,000 so we can open an office to protect Native women, missing and murdered Indigenous women's office. And we think it's really key and critical so that we have a place that's dedicated to doing this work. And my hope is that the Senate and the Senate Republicans in particular remember the commitment that they made to this task force previously and now back it up with the resources to truly address this issue.
And resources often get into the question of how the public sees this issue. Has there been a change at all in that?
I think so. And I think one of the reasons why is we have just tremendous advocates on the ground. And we have women in particular who have shared their stories, the families of women who have been murdered or missing have poured their hearts out and talked about their own trauma and have moved people. And I also think because we have folks like Sharice Davids in Congress and Ruth Anna Buffalo in North Dakota serving in the legislature, and now our Department of the Interior Secretary Holland, I think people are starting to see Native people in a way that they hadn't before. I think we know that Native women in particular have been leaders since time immemorial. It is the rest of society that is catching up with us. But I think it matters who's at the table when decisions are being made. And that is part of the progress that we've been able to make and to raise awareness.
What's been the reaction from the law enforcement side of the equation?
So far, the conversations of folks who are from law enforcement who've been part of the task force and broadly across the states, I think the message that I've heard is primarily of gratitude, of solutions and ideas coming directly from the community as to how to address these issues. But it's no secret that in Minnesota, we have a long way to go around issues of law enforcement and making sure that everyone is protected and safe and valued. And so I think that's where this office will be really important in helping to provide resources, shape the landscape, but also, intervene when we see either Native women who are misidentified or misclassified. Oftentimes that happens, right, to folks in our community, and can step in with that additional help and support, and frankly ask for some accountability.
Speaking of accountability and safe place, you recently talked about Minnesota not being a safe place for a Black person, and I'm curious about how, Minnesota has a track record of communities of color working together in ways that you don't always see. How do those two things work together in this broader story?
So, Mark, to be really candid with you, I was holding my breath before the verdict came in the Chauvin trial. And I actually didn't expect the conviction on all three counts. And I think what that provides for us is a foundation on which to build to ensure that people are safe and protected, and that we have a state where, regardless of who you are or where you come from, you have the right to not lose your life during a traffic stop. And a dear friend of mine reminded me just the other day, she said, remember that you are from Minneapolis, the birthplace of the American Indian movement, which was created in response to police brutality against the Native community. And so I think, that our destinies, our collective destinies are tied together. And that, when we show up for our Black relatives in response to the brutality that they are experiencing and the loss of another life of a Black Minnesotan, that we also can talk about that in greater Minnesota, it tends to be Native folks who experience the police brutality or violence. And so I think that is how we will move forward in a good way, is by standing up for each other, asking for this police reform and accountability, reimagining how we approach this issue of law enforcement overall. And I am very clear that if this state is safer for African Americans, it is safer for me as an Indigenous woman, it is safer for my daughter and for our communities, and that we are linked and we are stronger as we do this work and advocate together.
Reimagining is such a powerful word because it allows us to think what's possible, and that we've so often just pushed everything to law enforcement's table rather than thinking about what other tools we have as a government or as a society. Do you think this is that moment when we get to use those other tools?
I think it better be. And I think that's on us. And, as I talked about the murder of George Floyd and the conviction of Derek Chauvin being the foundation that we can build upon, that is our opportunity. Either we take this moment and are able to reimagine and to resource communities in the way that is needed and necessary, or we will do in Minnesota what we sometimes do, which is just be quiet in our discomfort and think that this issue will simply go away. But I can tell you that our Black, Indigenous communities of color feeling unsafe or being unsafe in Minnesota should be a crisis for all of us. And we should be using every tool in our toolbox needed and necessary to make sure that people feel safe. And to be really frank, I don't know that we have all the right tools. And so that is part of the conversation that we need to have. And I am in it, and I am eager to do that with other folks. And I think if we let this moment pass us by, shame on us.
And it's a conversation that's not just for Minnesota, but for the country and really every community, because even tribal communities have to be asking the same questions about what it means, even with your neighbors.
That's absolutely right. This is not an issue that is unique to Minnesota. We have certainly been in the spotlight lately. And I think because of that, we owe it to our state and community, and frankly, to the rest of the country, to try to figure out how to do this better, and to be able to share some of those practices. But I think the larger issue is that we are trying to use the same tools to address problems, and it's not working. And in fact, it is flawed to the point that people are losing their lives. And it's a tragedy, and we are continuing to be traumatized and re-traumatized, and we have to stop that cycle.
Shifting gears, I want to ask you about the COVID response and tribes in the state working together, particularly on the vaccine rollout. And how has that happened in Minnesota?
It has been incredible. I was able to be vaccinated at the White Earth Urban office, and I am grateful to my tribe for vaccinating. Some of the highest vaccination rates in the state are in the county where White Earth is located. They also started to do outreach to surrounding counties and vaccinating non-natives, and have been incredible partners. For the tribes in our state, they could choose if they wanted to get their vaccines through the state, or if they wanted to get them through Indian Health Service. Essentially, we're given the vaccine and told, you know what to do for your own communities, and you should do that. And unsurprisingly, when we give resources to tribal governments to be able to meet the needs of their own people without interference, they do it. They do it beautifully, and also are able to impact and help surrounding communities. So I am just, someone asked me the other day, they're like, why do you think that is? Why do you think vaccination rates are so high? And I said, because we care about each other. And, our communities have been through pandemics before, and we have stories about how those have impacted our people and our families. And so I'm not surprised that we've been able to do this, especially after the devastation that we've seen in Indian country. When given the opportunity to protect our own people, Indian country stepped up.
Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mark. Good to be with you. Be good.
And we'll be right back. It's an intriguing idea. What if the federal government returned national parks to tribes? That's the subject of a recent article by David Treuer for The Atlantic. He joins us now to talk about what this would look like. Welcome, David.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the outrageous idea. Why should national parks be turned back to tribes?
Why is it outrageous?
Precisely. Well, you don't have any argument here.
Yeah.
outrageous in terms of the public discourse and the ability to get people to actually move on something like this. What would need to happen?
What would need to happen? Well, the United States would need to renew and amplify its commitment to its founding principles of justice, being the most important. And the fact is, the national parks were started with the creation of Yellowstone, which was, I think, enabled and created in 1874 in the midst of the Plains Wars. The Battle at Little Bighorn was, 2 years away. And subsequently, most of the national parks were created around the same time and with the same congressional actors who pushed through the Dawes Act, the General Allotment Act, which, after the passage of the Dawes Act in the 1880s, we lost over 90 million acres was bled away from tribes and native nations. And at the same time, the government created the national park system. And by the time they were done, they put over 87 million acres into the national park system. And so, we are owed reparations collectively. And I think the parks would be a good start. And moreover, it would be good for the parks. I don't know how long it's been since you visited a national park, but they're kind of struggling with climate change, with overcrowding, with too many visitors, with kind of a lack of leadership. And the problem is, that the National Park Service is really vulnerable to this or that whim or, change in executive power. Obama put a bunch of land into national parks at Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. And then 2 weeks after Trump took office, he reduced Bears Ears by 80%. And it was only because Trump was really mad at the Park Service for reporting the real numbers at his inaugural, what do you want to call it? Party, festival, funeral. I don't know what you want to call it. But so he was mad at the Park Service. And so he just, with the stroke of his pen, attempted to demolish Bears Ears. So parks need stability, they need leadership, and who better to do it than us?
Right. In fact, I'm just showing Bannock, so Yellowstone is our homeland. And I always remember the wonderful story about Chief Joseph on his trek running into tourists that would become Yellowstone. I mean, it was that fresh in what he was doing on. One of the amazing things, I guess, that tribes have been doing anyway is that they've been moving into national parks with co-management. Bears Ears would have been a great example had it gone to the fruition, but also Canyon de Chelly and other places where tribes are saying, we can help you out now, even before a transfer of any kind.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, the national parks and the Park Service have been getting better over the years. It used to be that, parks were framed and sort of described to us in the placards and by park rangers and sort of in the literature, were framed as sort of these wild, untouched natural places, outside of human control and influence. And, of course, we know that's not true. We know that Native people have been, for better and worse, shaping and changing this landscape for millennia and long before Europeans got here. So there's no such thing as nature without humans. We know this. But that outlook of the Park Service has been changing, right? They now are recognizing, of course, and the way they present the parks, that Native people have a long history and presence there and continue to have that, relationship. And then in places like Canyon de Chelly and the Grand Canyon, and other places, there are Knife River, I think, in North Dakota. These are sites that are, some of which are co-managed by tribes and the Park Service. But, I think there's a bigger thing that we need to do, which is we need to return all the national parks to a consortium of tribes for us to manage on behalf of all Americans. Because, we need to privilege our relationship to the land, and we need to privilege a kind of political as well as a cultural behavior on the part of the United States to do the right thing. There's this quote by Camus who said, "I should like to be able to love justice and still love my country." And so if one were standing in Yellowstone and looking out at those vistas, it would be nice to be able to look at that natural space and to recognize not only its natural beauty, but also that you're standing on native land. And the fact that you get to stand there is indicative of just and reasonable and conscientious actions on the part of the United States.
Last year was the 50th anniversary of the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo by the Forest Service. And that really is a precedent for what could happen. And clearly Blue Lake has benefited from that transfer, not to mention the culture at Taos.
Absolutely. And this has happened in other countries. Huge portions of Australia were deeded and given back to Aboriginal communities to manage. And same thing happened in New Zealand. So there's a precedent out there in the world, and there's something that this country really needs to do. We need to be able to live in a country that still privileges justice. And this is one way to do that.
Well, with that, we'll leave it there. Thank you, David Treuer.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. We will be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.